part of our goal with these trainings is to give you an opportunity to meet new people and expand your professional networks. So to give you an idea of who all is in the room today, we have representatives from Braselton Touchpoint Center, Larimer County, Foothills Gateway, Poudre School District, Colorado State University, Early Care and Education Providers, Thompson School District, UC Health, the Jacobs Center, the Matthews House, Summit Stone Health Partners, and even the Wyoming Children's Trust Fund. So thanks for coming down. So before we get started, I wanted to share a few updates about LEAP. And as most of you know, the LEAP Coalition is a community-wide initiative to support early childhood social-emotional development in Larimer County. We are made up of 50 core partners from more than 20 organizations across Larimer County. And our work focuses on three main areas, which are workforce development, community awareness and advocacy, and supporting a coordinated system of early identification and intervention of social-emotional concerns in young children. And so, in an effort to meet our workforce development goals, LEAP offers professional development training and community events throughout the year, including this event today, which is our annual community conversation starter and will serve as a kickoff for the new 2019-2020 event season. And this year, we're also excited to announce a new workforce development program that we will be piloting this fall. Thanks to a generous grant we received from the Larimer County Department of Behavioral Health Services, LEAP is partnering with Colorado Association for Infant Mental Health, or COAIM, to sponsor a cohort of 10 family and child-serving professionals in Larimer County to begin the application process for the COAIM Infant Mental Health endorsement. The endorsement is one of the first and most comprehensive efforts in the country to identify best practices at multiple levels across disciplines and to offer a pathway for professional development in infant, early childhood, and family mental health. This opportunity is open to all educational levels and all positions who work with young children, from ECE providers to program coordinators and mental health clinicians. We will be hosting an informational session about the endorsement and the LEAP-sponsored cohort opportunity next Thursday, September 19th, at the Early Childhood Council offices from 10:30 a.m. until 12:30 p.m. Registration spots are limited and can be reserved at leapcoalitionlarimer.org. Now, I would like to introduce ECCLC's new Executive Director, Christina Taylor. Christina joined the ECCLC team in May of this year. She joins us from the Wyoming Department of Health, where she served as the Women and Infant Health Program Manager. Previous to that, she worked for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Christina also served as an in-home child care provider following the birth of her 2 young children. So she understands the full scope of early childhood, and we're very excited to have her on board. Please help me in welcoming Christina to the stage.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for being here today. As Liz mentioned, I joined the ECCLC in May of this year when our previous executive director, Beth Thurber, retired. And I am extremely grateful and honored to be a part of the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County. As you know, the ECCLC provides backbone support to the LEAP Coalition. And from everything I've learned in the first few months in this role, I've been so impressed with the work of this group and of the LEAP Coalition. There's been an enormous amount of advocacy work and education in the community led by Liz. And I am blown away by the momentum that I'm seeing within the LEAP Coalition. I think that it's going to continue to grow to just positively impact children and the mental health services in our community. I'm not going to say much more, but I am very excited to introduce you to today's speaker. Dr. Sarah Enos Watamura is an associate professor of psychology and director of the Child Health and Development Laboratory at the University of Denver. Dr. Watamura has been conducting research on physiological stress in young children for nearly 15 years and is part of an international community of scholars who focus their research efforts on explicating and the contributing and buffering factors associated with early life stress, as well as its consequences. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Watamura to the stage.
Good morning. I can't stay still. Lovely to see you all and to be up here in Fort Collins this Fine afternoon. I am excited to spend the next 2 hours with you. If you have ever seen me present before, will you raise your hand? Okay, just a couple. Okay, great. So those of you who have, hey, you guys didn't raise your hands. Okay. If you have ever been in this kind of setting with me before, you know that I have a couple of requests for you, which is that we have 2 hours. We have 2 hours to learn and push forward together. So that's going to mean we all have to lean in, put aside the other things on your mind, which I'm sure are very important. So let's try to do that together. I know it's hard. And then if something really pressing happens and you have to step out, take care of that need, and don't look back, because you have to do the things that are most important in life. So we're going to talk about adversity. We're going to do that for a chunk of our time. There is more scientific information about adversity than there is about resilience. I was also trained as an adversity researcher, and so that framework is pretty prevalent. So that doesn't mean that that side of the story is the most important side. And I want to make sure that we spend lots of time thinking about how we might do a better job of measuring and understanding resilience, which is going to take all of us pushing some on that angle. So we're going to go through quite a bit of information, but I want to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. So I am part of a research group, amazing group of currently all women, and we look at the effects of early experience from the prenatal period all across the lifespan. We take a family systems approach, so we look at how things interact across generations. And we look at all different kinds of intersections of psychological and biological processes. So that means we do brain imaging, we look at hormones, genes, lots of different kinds of biomarkers, blood samples, saliva samples, a lot of that kind of thing. But we also spend a lot of time with people in their homes, in their childcare environments, in the communities where they are, to try to understand things like neighborhood factors, historical trauma, other kinds of factors that might be contributing to their current experience. So definitely check us out if you're interested. Anybody wants to go back to school and do a PhD, come visit us. So I'd like to start by asking you to do a think, pair, share. A think, pair, share is where you first take some period of time, 1 to 2 minutes typically, just all by yourself to think of your own answer. And then you speak to the person next to you, okay? And then you pull together as a table. It is actually really important that you do each of those steps separately, because otherwise we cheat ourselves of the opportunity to really think of as many creative solutions and answers as possible. So if you could please, each individually, if you have something to write on, great. If you don't, you can just think. Let's take 90 seconds. What do you think are the top issues facing your community right now? So now please turn to the person next to you and share your thoughts. Okay, great job. Now, if you can, good job. Okay, so now I want you to, as a table, pick your top issue. We can do it in order. Okay, choose a representative to share your top issue. We're gonna come around with the mics.
I think housing is our priority. It's a must here in Fort Collins or Larimer County. It's truly hard for our clients to find an affordable place to live.
Okay, housing. Raise your hand.
We talked about access, whether that's because of cost of living or just the resources available to access the things that they need, like housing, childcare, that sort of thing.
Okay, all right, so just pick a table now. They've had enough time.
And we as well talked about economic instability and everything that falls underneath that. So cost of childcare, cost of housing, uncertain or unstable jobs, all those things have a broader impact on everything else.
Okay, thanks.
We also talked about access, services, as well as just community supports. People are more isolated in today's world. Friends, neighbors, not talking to each other, that kind of stuff.
For us, it was affordable housing and affordable quality childcare and all of the dominoes that get knocked over by those issues.
Literally what she said. Childcare access, affordable housing.
Access and childcare. We actually talked about a couple different things related to resources, to mental health resources.
Okay.
And whether or not that has anything to do with the language barriers in Fort Collins as well. Since we have such a melting pot of people that live here, and knowing that, you know, English is primarily spoken, Spanish is secondary, but when you talk to a lot of people, like within my community at my job, Arabic is the second most common language, and to find resources for families like that is difficult.
Great, thank you.
We also are second/thirding, fourthing, fifthing the housing and access vote. We came down to lack of hope for our big issue.
Nobody's getting a pass here, so your table's coming.
After all of those seconds, we picked transportation, LGBTQ issues, immigration as well.
We had talked about all of the issues mentioned so far, but in addition to that, we talked about mental health issues, and specifically we were talking about those things leading to increase in suicides, even in our little community in Estes Park. We've seen that as well, so that was a concern.
Okay, thank you.
We second everything that's been mentioning. One of the things we talked about was isolation. The neighborhood foundation's not there, the connection with the school, and really making sure that they have for their mental health and drug and alcohol issues being addressed. We see that as a big issue too.
We also, we also identified the loss of relationship and human connection as being a major priority as one of our issues.
We second cost of living, including childcare, healthcare, and housing, and then kind of segregation, whether it's self-segregation or just disconnectedness, but the fact that people pool in certain areas based on where they feel comfortable, where the services are, that kind of thing.
So we talked first was, remind me ladies, childcare, housing, mental health, and we also mentioned equity versus equality.
We second everything they said, and we also talked about just the climate of fear, especially for our families that are immigrating here and how it puts up barriers to services.
Ditto everything, and then we discussed trauma and how that can bleed to everything else, including mental health and substance abuse and all of the other things we've talked about.
We also talked about everything that has been said and how the growth of our community has been so fast that it's led to this pretty face but some instability underneath, with the housing and access to housing and childcare, as well as suicides and addiction.
Okay, if your table hasn't gone yet, can you raise your hand? Help Liz out. Okay.
We'll start over here. One of the things that was mentioned that was interesting was food quality, in terms of sustainable and just healthy options for many families in the community.
We also had the same comments that we've heard this afternoon. We would also add that there's a mental health and substance abuse issue, and it bleeds into the workforce and the gap of a workforce that with additional awareness around substance abuse and mental health issues, we don't have the workforce to support our community.
We second everything that everybody else has said, and our second was mental health access.
We did as well, the exact same thing. Affordable housing was our number one, and mental health resources, especially with Spanish-speaking families, is a big need.
Raise your hand if you haven't gone yet. Okay.
We talked about a lot of the same issues as well with mental health and suicide prevention, access to resources, and the ability to families to have the resources to connect as a family.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of things related to housing and access to services, and then settled on as our second biggest issue, substance abuse.
Yeah, we talked about everything that everyone has already said. We also see a lot of grandparents having to take custody of their grandchildren. So that's kind of been a big issue.
Okay, raise your hand if you haven't gone yet. Just a few there in the middle. Okay.
Yes, we also second the housing resources or lack thereof. We also talked about that there aren't many readily available resources for mental health, and the ones that are there are exasperated beyond, our need. And also we talked about the opioid and meth epidemic. There's a lot more babies and referrals of babies born on drugs than the past few years, for sure.
So we agree with everything that everyone's already said, and we felt like substance use and lack of resources to that support, whether it's treatment, mental health, and in particular, addiction has risen probably in this state due to, access to drugs and the opioid epidemic and vaping and all of those things, so.
So in our group, we probably touched on every single one of the things that have been mentioned here. So we went to look at what's a broader picture of this, and what we decided on is having community resources available that families need to build resiliency in parents and children. And availability covers knowing about the resources, knowing how to access them, having financial means if it requires that, and being emotionally ready to access them.
Oh, thank you. Okay. We second what everyone has said. It's kind of hard to find another issue, but overwhelmingly the poverty, the trauma, the substance abuse, I think that it's fair to say that people turn to those things because of what they've been through and because they don't have the resources. And then you add on top of that the burnout for clinicians, the lack of pay, and so I think it's just kind of a big, massive cycle.
In addition to what everyone has talked about, we also talked about worker burnout and secondary traumatic stress, particularly with teachers, caseworkers, but a lot of people just in the helping field.
We said almost identically the same thing that everybody else said relating to cost of living in the community, affordable housing, affordable child care, social emotional well-being, drug abuse. We did not really focus that much on one area that I think is important, and that's prevention and early identification.
Did we get everybody? Anybody left? Okay, thank you. I ask that question everywhere I go. I hear a lot of the same issues, but their relative proportion varies across the country and the world. So those are big issues, right? Those are big, heavy, socio-political, economic issues. I know I sometimes wake up and think it's so difficult to make any kind of change, right? How am I gonna have any effect on these massive, very complex issues? And has anyone had that feeling? Has anyone had that feeling? Okay, has anyone not had that feeling? But in fact, I think one of the things I've learned across my life is that actually none of us are powerless, right? None of us are powerless. No one is powerless. You can lead from any position in a group. You can lead from any position in a group. You can make change happen. You can decide. I heard social connection, relationships, mental health access. We can build those things in every interaction we have, right? Every day. And I have sort of taken that aspect on as my personal charge. So I will not be hit by a bus and have the last thing I did be rude. I may get hit by a bus, but the last thing I did will not be rude. I will not show up at a meeting and have something more important on my mind and not be present for the people that I'm with. If I'm too busy to do it, then I won't go. If I miss an opportunity to vote, my house better be on fire, okay? If I miss an opportunity to show up for a kid, whether it's my kid or a kid in the grocery store, then I missed the most important opportunity that happened to me that week, okay? So we are all in this complex space together, and our professional work matters and our personal work matters, and every single interaction we have matters. So can you say it with me? No one is powerless against this. No one is powerless against this. All right, we're gonna get this done, because there is no other more pressing public health problem than the one we're facing right now, okay? So we're gonna get this done. We're just gonna lean in and we're gonna get it done. We're gonna get those people out of office that need to get out of office. We're gonna tell our business leaders what we need. We're gonna buy according to our values. We're gonna vote. We're gonna show up for kids, and we're gonna get it done. All right, so let's talk about the current state of the science, where individual family stress adversity fits ecologically in the broader system. So when I learned about adversity, the adversity that happens inside families, I learned about it as if it happens inside families. What happens inside families happens because of the socio-ecologic context, right? As you guys have all been raising. Why did that happen in that family? What else has happened here? What is the starting place in this wheel that we're in, right? Where did this trouble begin? I was at this very cool program in Pennsylvania that provides super intensive services for families where a parent has been drug addicted. So they go to the home, the teachers go to the home on the bus, pick up the kid, do a sobriety check, take the child to this very intensive, supportive environment where they have rehabilitative equipment and social emotional support. They're there all day, and then they take them back home on the bus and do a sobriety check with the parents before they leave. If the parents are not sober on the front or the back end, the social worker is there within 10 minutes. So it's a very cool, very intensive program. Why do you need this very cool, very intensive program, right? So I was asking, just like I asked you, how did we get here, right? What has happened here? Why is this happening in your community? And someone raised their hand and said, weak moral fiber is the reason we've gotten to this place, which I thought was a very fascinating comment. So I asked some more questions, tell me what you mean, let's talk about what that is. And then someone said, well, what's so hard about this is that 90% of the parents in this program were foster kids. Whose weak moral fiber is it then, right? These are our kids. If it's foster kids, aren't those all of our responsibility? So that was an interesting insight to me. This super intensive program is trying to fix, with these very intensive individual level services, something that is happening all across the social fabric. So trying to understand how stress and adversity fits into the social fabric, I think helps us think about what levers we can change. Where can we have the biggest impact? And we tend to be very program focused, so let's provide programs to these individual kids, to these individual families. And I'm a big believer in programs, I'm a developer of programs, but it's sort of like, it's a Band-Aid, right? It's a treatment of the symptoms that have emerged from a broader system, and if we don't simultaneously work across other levels of the system, I think we are going to continue to be frustrated and not see progress at the speed we would like to see. So when we think about the science of adversity, the science of stress, I think we need to realize that it really is several different lines of research that are used relatively interchangeably, though I do not think they are interchangeable. So there is the research on adversity and threat, which is separate from the research on poverty and scarcity. It is more likely that you experience adversity and threat if you experience poverty and scarcity, but those things are not the same, right? Lots of kids, in fact, very many kids in high-income families experience adversity and threat. Very many families who experience low income at this point in time are parenting beautifully, right? So these are not the same. They interact, they intersect, and we need to think separately about their effects and what we want to do about that. Yay, there's an actual baby in here. I was like, I hear it. I hear it. Then there is the issue of inequity. Somebody raised the idea of equity versus equality in the back table. I think about this a lot. So inequity is something that is contributing not only to the poverty, scarcity, adversity, threat, but also to this sense of hopelessness, this sense of impossible striving. Then a lot of the research on adversity and poverty is focused on health outcomes. That's the driver often. That's the clearest evidence, but there are also more proximal consequences, proximal being those that happen sooner in time, more direct, that we can see unfolding in the lives of children and families, right? That are flags, that are warning signs. And if we do a better job of connecting those dots, I think we will have an easier time helping people see the return on investment that they will receive if they put prevention in place. But sometimes, often, the person who is going to reap the benefit of the prevention program, right, because of, say, drop in cardiovascular disease down the road, isn't going to be in office anymore, right, isn't going to be receiving that economic benefit. So trying to get that individual actor to change requires identification of more proximal outcomes. That's not something outside of our power to do, but we need to think about it that way, right? So if I want to know whether a 3-year-old is at risk for cardiovascular disease because of the adversity, threat, and low resources they're experiencing, what do I need to know about that? What can I measure in that 3-year-old so I can start to see the traction, the effect of that intervention? So I think it's well within our capability of doing that, but we have to change the way we ask the question. I don't know, where is the thing that I'm pointing this at? Like, there, okay, thank you. Because that isn't it. I keep doing that like it's gonna work. Okay, so there is lots and lots and lots of research on the effects of stress on health. This is a very well, I would say, overly well-studied topic. We don't really need to study this anymore. We know that stressful, and you don't need to try to read that. It's small like that, so you don't try. But these citations are all on here in case you ever want to look at them because, and you're welcome to have the slides, because these are giant, very expensive research projects that are quite convincing. Scientists never say things are definitive or say that things are answered, but there are some things that we've studied so much that we really do feel quite confident in. So we know that experiencing chronic stress across your lifetime and sometimes experiencing severe stress influences both whether you get sick and what happens after you get sick. So we call that susceptibility and progression of illness. That's definitely true for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and infectious illness, and it's also true for a number of other diseases. That's why when somebody gets a diagnosis of a significant chronic illness, they are often offered support, social support programs, right, for the patient and for the caregiver, right? We know that stress matters in what happens for how this disease unfolds, so let's offer this family some social support services. We know a lot about how it happens that stress leads to disease. So we know that stressful experiences change your risk factors for a number of chronic conditions, and that is really pretty well understood. So if you go to the doctor and have a physical, there's a number of things you can think to yourself what they are that they measure when you go to the doctor. All of those are risk factors for things like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, right? So they are tracking, whether or not they're talking to you about it, they are tracking your risk factors, your cholesterol, your triglycerides, your other triglycerides, your weight, your blood pressure, right? Across time, they're tracking those things. Maybe they're asking you things about how many drinks you have per week, whether you smoke, whether you exercise. Maybe they're doing a domestic violence screener. They're doing all of those things because they're trying to estimate whether they need to intervene for your health outcomes, right? I mean, we all know that at some level, but we don't tend to think about it. Well, it turns out that stressful experiences change literally all of those risk factors, okay? So you experience lots of stress, and all of those metabolic, cardiovascular, and social indicators take a hit, okay? So that is one mechanism whereby experiencing stress can lead to chronic disease. And it gives us an idea about what we might do to intervene, right? Okay, so if by having lots of stress, you're more likely to have, say, high cholesterol, rather than waiting for your doctor to give you a medication to bring your cholesterol down, you could do what? Change your diet, change your exercise, right? We are all on this trajectory. Everybody's on the same trajectory, you're just somewhere on it. And you can think about what you want that to look like. What do you want that to be? And some of us have to work harder, right? If you have genetic risk for a particular condition, you have to work harder, you have to start earlier to change that trajectory. The exact same thing is true if you've experienced lots of adversity. It's more important that you don't smoke, and it's more likely that you're gonna want to. Okay, so you have to work harder to change your position on that trajectory, but trajectory is not destiny, and you are not subject only to the unfolding of what other people have set up for you to have occur. Stressful experiences can also impair cognitive functioning. That's how it's usually discussed. I think what stressful experiences do is change your cognitive priorities. They change what you remember and what you attend to. They change how you think about things because you've experienced the world to be threatening, low resource, unpredictable, so you behave differently, right? That's perfectly reasonable. But it turns out that if you spend a lot of time remembering and attending to and thinking about dangerous and threatening things in the world, it's harder to have the attention and the memory for things that have long delays, okay? So like complex mathematics. It's hard to focus in on things that take that kind of energy because your brain is busy doing other things more focused on survival. It is also the case that chronic stressful experiences increase your risk for depression, anxiety, and externalizing behavior problems. All of those things are true. Externalizing behavior problems depends on how old you are, what we call them, like conduct disorder or whatever. So basically, if you've experienced the world to be threatening and low resource, and you're thinking about that all the time, and you're interacting with other people as if that's your experience, it's perhaps not surprising that you might be more at risk for anxiety, depression, or externalizing problems, right? Which is that your read, your gauge for how you interpret things in the world is different, right, than the average person. So the easiest way to think about this one is to think about anxiety. So what is the difference between anxiety and fear? Does anyone know? Yeah, those are both true. Let's say I tell you I am afraid of, really afraid of, I'm trying to think of a good example. Escalators. I am actually really afraid of escalators. Okay, I'm really afraid of escalators. Like, I'm so afraid of escalators that I will, like, walk. This isn't really true, but I'm afraid of them and I ride them. But let's say I'm so afraid of them that I have to go, like, I'm in the airport. Have you been to the airport recently? I have to go like a mile to find an elevator because I'm not gonna get on the escalator, and then I miss my flight. What is that, fear or anxiety? Anxiety, right? Okay, because is everybody afraid of escalators? Do we think that it's likely that I'm gonna get hurt on the escalator? No. So the difference between anxiety and fear is a credible threat. If it is something that everybody's afraid of that could likely happen, we call that fear. We call acting in response to active shooter warning, right? Jumping under the table in that context, that's fear, and that's saving your life potentially. Not getting on the escalator, we call that anxiety, okay? So what do we do? Let's say we got raise your hand if you're a clinician. I think there's a lot of you here, okay? All right, so I come to you and I say, I've got this fear, I'm missing flights because I don't get on the escalator. So you're gonna tell me to do what? Right, maybe you're gonna have me approach the escalator, right? And then I just put your hand on the escalator, right? We're gonna work me up to it. What are we doing? What are you doing to my brain? You're telling my brain, look, it's not threatening. Okay, let's do it again, not threatening. Let's do it again, not threatening. Let's do it again, not threatening. So now, the chance that that is scary to you goes down because you have learned that it's not threatening, okay? So if you're a little kid and half the time when you go home, somebody hits you or yells at you, right? So then you go to school and somebody looks at you funny and you whack them, is that fear or anxiety? How is that child acting rational? They are. It's not gonna get them a good outcome, right? But it makes complete sense in the world that they live in because they have learned that that is what they can expect. So if you want to change the way somebody acts in a certain situation, you have to change their reality. Their experience has to be remapped. You have to expose them to a predictable, safe environment, right, across time. So that's why if you've had like a difficult early attachment relationship with a parent, that can be recovered in a stable adult romantic relationship, right? Because you learn then that that adult is reliably available to you, is emotionally available to you, is not withdrawing or angry or intrusive. You learn those things, and then you can kind of rewire your expectations. So I think it's really important to keep this in mind because we pathologize what is rational, and then we treat it like a disease. And I think if you want to change the way somebody behaves, you might think about changing the environment that they're in, which you might think you have no control over, but you actually do, right? Don't promise kids things you can't give them. It's tempting to do that. Don't be unreliable. And you don't have that much control over whether their case is going to get switched, right? Maybe prepare them for that. So there's things we can do to change their expectation that people behave irrationally and threatening and unavailably all the time. Okay, and then the most dramatic thing that we've all learned is that stressful experiences can dramatically accelerate aging. So they can take many years off your life, and we know a lot even about how that happens. So you have both a chronologic age and a functional age. You can think of your chronologic age for me. Everybody think of yours? Or some rough approximation of it? You got it? Okay. You also have a functional age. Okay. Some of you may feel much younger than your chronologic age, and some of you likely feel older than your chronologic age. It is possible to measure that. Okay, so I could measure your functional age with a saliva sample. It's not very hard. And it is possible to change that. Okay, so you can change your cellular aging is what we're measuring. You can change the maturational timeline that your body is on, but you have to think about it that way, right? You have to think about what that looks like and what that means. If you want to reverse the effects of accelerated aging that naturally occur when an environment is stressful and threatening. See, I did it again. All right, so you probably know that smoking, obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes take between 5 and 10 years off your life expectancy. Your life expectancy is the age you're expected to live based on your birth year, okay? So whatever year you're born, there's an estimate. It's a little different number for men and women you're probably aware of. And that number, your current personal life expectancy, is decreased if you smoke, are obese, have high blood pressure, have diabetes, okay? So that's what that means, to have those effects. Oh, jumpy. Childhood stress can take up to 20 years off your total lifespan. So as a single individual risk factor, there is no other that is that powerful. 20 years means that if your life expectancy was, say, 76, which maybe is for many people in the room, you're now expected to live to 56, okay? The difference between 56 and 76 means your grandkids don't know you, right? The difference between 56 and 76 is a huge economic impact for your community. So this is a problem, not just for the individual, and maybe much more so, right? For their family, for their community, and for all of us, for the fabric that all of us depend on, which is expecting the contributions of our elders, right? Their economic, their social, their literal, physical contributions to the world that we're in. I was taking my daughter to piano last night, and there was a concert, and almost everyone waiting in line for the concert had white hair. And so my 6-year-old daughter was like, what is it with the white-haired people and the piano? And so I started trying to explain to her. I was like, well, older people have, more time. And then I got in this whole thing with her. I was like, what would happen to the arts, honestly, if we didn't have retired people? What would happen to I'm trying to explain to her, like, why I don't go to plays. I'm like, I can't, honey. I can't make that fit. And she says, well, I'm also very busy. My 6-year-old, I'm very busy. I don't have time to go to plays either unless we go during the day at school. I say, yeah, it's a good thing we have all those retired people to support the arts. But it actually literally is, right? So that was just an interesting aha moment for me of a consequence I hadn't previously thought of. Okay, so the literature on adversity and threat is very much focused around this particular pyramid, which I know many of you have seen, if not all of you, and many of you know well. You might notice this is the updated version. If you don't have the updated version, definitely update your slides. But essentially, this is the pyramid from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which is they're still going, a study that began in 1995 in Southern California with over 17,000 participants who were all Kaiser patients. They reported on their retrospective experiences before age 18, and their medical records were tracked and continue to be tracked. People reported on 10, it's actually 63 items, the full questionnaire is. However, it is reduced to 10 adverse childhood experiences, which are, can we shout them out? I know you know them. Divorce, separation, never married, okay, yes. Death, I actually don't think that's on there. So it's abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse of the child, neglect of the child, divorced or separated parents, domestic violence in the home, living with adults who has mental illness, has been incarcerated, is substance using. How many's that? Did we get them all? No, that was more than 6. All right. Sexual, physical, emotional abuse, neglect. That's 4. Parents separated, divorced, or never married. Living in domestic violence, living with an adult who has mental illness, substance abuse, or was incarcerated. What are we missing? It isn't death of a parent. It's not death of a parent. No. Somebody look it up. It's driving me bananas. I can't believe I can't come up with all 10 of them. Yes? No. It's none of those. No. It's not any of those sensible things. Anyway, it's 10 things. You've already generated other things, which is I said deep. Yeah, I did. Anyway, okay. You know what it is? Neglect is 2. Physical or emotional neglect. That's what it is. Okay, 10. Did it. All right, so as you've already pointed out, there are important things not on that list, right? Death of a parent, living in poverty, having been trafficked. That's clearly an ACE. However, those 10 ACEs is what they measured, and they have been powerfully linked to illness and all kinds of things across the lifespan. So this study is where the 20-year lifespan reduction number comes from. Individuals in that study who had 6 or more ACEs died 20 years before their life expectancy, okay? So 4 or more ACEs is associated with a whole host of chronic health conditions, and the ACE study has a dose-response relationship whereby more adversity is connected to more risk, in a sort of ladder-like fashion. On some indicators, there's no difference between 0 and 1. 2/3 of the population, general population, has experienced at least 1 adversity. 12 to 15% have experienced 4 or more. If you dive into any special population, of course, those numbers go up, okay? So that's what we're working with in terms of the ACE study. And we can disagree and argue about what else should have been measured, but I think the main thing, which the CDC also agrees with, is that that doesn't take into account any protective factors. It's only adverse factors. Now, if you've had 6 of those adversities, it probably suggests that you didn't have the buffering protection of an adult. However, it isn't the same to count those up as it is to also measure positive factors. So if you go on the CDC website now, there will be protective factors surveys on there that you can also use. It is also the case that adversity experienced early in life and later in life interacts. So what you see here, the orange line, is more than the additive effect of having adversity early and later in life. This is a study of almost 40,000 people in Finland. And the orange line, or all of the lines, reflect cardiovascular events, so stroke or heart disease. And what you see is that continuing to experience adversity in adulthood interacts with experiencing adversity early in life. And the reason I bring this up is we're often trying to do things for kids with their parents who themselves are experiencing a current set of circumstances, right? So stopping to think about what is happening to that parent, not just for the purpose of changing the trajectory of the child, but also for the purpose of changing the trajectory of that adult, requires thinking about it in that way. These interactive effects start pretty early. So if you experience adversity early in life and in adolescence, you can see effects on your health by age 32. I actually saw a recent study that was age 26. So 26-year-olds, 32-year-olds, generally pretty healthy. But if they've experienced adversity early in life and again in adolescence, at 2 sensitive periods, they've communicated to their brain and body that this is a dangerous, threatening, low-resource world, and therefore they've prioritized survival over long-term health outcomes. Okay. Poverty and scarcity has been studied differently, separately, and quite a bit. As you probably know, approximately 41% of kids in the US at this point are experiencing low income. That's relative to the national federal poverty line, so that's gonna be about 200% of the federal poverty line. 41%, so that's a huge proportion. And when you experience poverty early in life, it is related to lifelong health. So it is related to things like body mass index, waist to hip ratio. Experiencing poverty and trying to be upwardly mobile is the sort of darkest of the gray lines there, and that's an interesting one because you can see systolic blood pressure is actually high there. So that's a reflection, I think, of the stress of upward mobility. So something to keep in mind when we're working with families who are working 3 jobs and trying to get their family back on track. That's actually very stressful for the adults and something to consider. It is also the case that experiencing early life poverty is related to dental health, and dental health and overall health are highly correlated. You probably know that, but it's an interesting marker. And there are some, I don't know if they're doing it up here, but there are quite a few programs in Colorado trying to work on increasing dental health, because it is something that we can do something about with the little guys, and matters and contributes to their lifelong health. And then experiencing early poverty also shapes mental health, depression, alcohol dependence, tobacco dependence, but those are not only the case for people who have experienced persistently low income. So you see here that actually there's some risk across several income groups. And we're going to talk about that again, because substance use in particular is something that cross-cuts socioeconomic groups very dramatically, and that is very obvious to everyone right now with the opioid crisis, but has actually always been true. So the type of substance that's used might vary based on the starting substance that the person might use may vary by socioeconomic circumstance, but the endpoint may not. Okay, and then more time spent in poverty growing up. So you sometimes hear the language persistent poverty, which is 5 of the previous 10 years, or deep poverty, which is 50% of the federal poverty line. Those things increase wear and tear on the body, or allostatic load, as we tend to call it. So you can see effects across many body systems, like the ones doctors are checking for when you go in for a physical, happening when kids experience more years of poverty in early life. Okay, it's also the case, that's Eldar Shafir, who is a lovely person and a very interesting researcher. And what he's done is try to manipulate, there's a lot of times people talk about the experience of poverty, or people who are experiencing poverty, as having bad judgment. So far to the extent that people talk about executive function training, or different kinds of cognitive skills training that people might need in order to change their circumstances. So what he's done is taken Princeton or Yale undergraduates and put them in situations where they experience scarcity, and shown that they behave very similarly to people who are experiencing poverty. So while your average Princeton or Yale undergraduate would perform quite well on an executive function battery under unstrained conditions, if you strain them, put them in a position of scarcity, they also show difficulty with those things. And they make choices like accepting loan shark credit rates. So it's a very interesting, he has a very interesting set of studies. I'd recommend his book, Scarcity, as something to think about, because again, if we want to change something, we have to understand it, right? So if somebody has an underlying cognitive deficit, an underlying executive function deficit, your strategy is different than if they're executing those skills differently because of the situation they're in, right? I could give you all the training in the world. If that's not the problem, I'm wasting a lot of resources. You know, similarly, I could give you all the parenting classes in the world. Is it that you don't know what to do? Is that the issue, right? So a good corollary is to think about smoking, right? So let's say I want to help somebody stop smoking, okay? So I'm gonna use the parent intervention model, okay? So I'm gonna go to their house and I'm gonna explain about how bad smoking is for them, because they don't know that, right? That's why they smoke? Okay, then I'm gonna model not smoking. I'm going to show them how I eat my carrots and chew gum if I get stressed out. Because that's why they're smoking, right? Because they need someone to show them? No? So why are they smoking? Why would somebody right now smoke when we know how bad it is for you? Right. They're taking the short-term gain and paying the long-term price. Do they think they're going to be here in the long term? Are they worrying about that right now? They're worrying about now. Would you worry about only now if you thought there was no way to get to 20 years from now or 30 years from now? Of course you would, right? Anybody would make the same choices. So I do firmly believe that there are some parenting skills that people could learn. I also firmly believe that that is true of all of us. I also firmly believe that most of the time, we are not being our best parenting selves, not because we don't know how to do it, right? But because we can't exercise those skills in the environment we're in, okay? Like, you know, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and my daughter has this habit of telling me what a terrible parent I am. She loves to tell me that. So she's her newest thing is that she'd like to trade me in for a full-time mom, because I'm just a part-time mom, because I work, you know, so she'd like to trade me in for a stay-at-home mom, I think is what she'd like. So she's telling me this, and I'm tolerating it. Like, it's a little hard to hear, let's be fair. So she'd like this, whatever, I don't know, cookie baking mom or something like this. This is the one you got. So I'm trying to explain this to her, and it goes on, and then she's like, she won't go to bed, and it's thing after thing. Okay, I lose my patience with my child. I lose my patience, and I'm like, can you stop just focusing on your own needs right now? And then I spend the rest of the night feeling bad for being mad at my 6-year-old for, like, the world. And, right, is it because I don't know I shouldn't talk to her like that? Like, I could not have more relevant education, okay? That's not why, like, there's nothing left. There's no more school I can do. So that's not why I can't be my best parenting self, right? I can't be my best parenting self because, you know what? I would love to also be here for you all the time, right? But I'm not that person. I can't be that person. And we're dependent on my income and all the other factors. And that's not her fault, right? But that's why I lost my temper. So just keeping in mind, information is one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot else that goes into it. And Eldar is an excellent place to go when you're looking for examples of that. I think I have a couple. I'm not going to learn this, I think. He has these cool studies where he feeds people a bunch of pretzels and then they can't have any water. And he sees how well they can do other things, right? Are they focused only on the water? They're only focused on the water, right? Their performance goes down and down and down until you give them water, and then they're better. So that kind of thing. Stuff where they go to the mall and tell people like, oh, hey, your car, by the way, out front, it got hit, and it's going to cost $500 to repair it, or it's going to cost $1,500 to repair it, and it turns out that depending on your economic circumstances, if I tell you it's going to cost you $1,500 to repair your car, you no longer can finish that math test. If you don't have the strain, if you've got the $1,500, it doesn't have any effect on you. You're not happy about it, right? But you can still finish the math test. So just interesting manipulations. Okay, and then he does a flip side of studies where he looks at how people judge other people. And literally, if you take the exact same person and change their shirt, the way people evaluate their intelligence, their competence, their integrity, their likelihood of sticking with a job changes. So those programs where we help people get clothes to interview better, those actually matter, right? And processes in employment hiring contexts where you're forced to be equitable in the way you evaluate candidates, and you're not allowed to say they don't fit, right? Fit is a sort of catchword for bias. Those really matter. So think about that the next time you're making a hiring decision. The next time you're judging somebody because of the way they're dressed. The next time you have some extra clothes you could donate, where you might think about dropping those off. And then he also does some research on how much people believe that individuals suffer, have discomfort, or strength in a situation. It turns out that people overestimate the strength of people of color, of people in low socioeconomic status, and underestimate their perception of pain, right? So that if you don't think someone is suffering, you help them less, right? So they don't get the same medication, they don't get the same services. This is true of doctors, this is true of lawyers, this is true of the rest of us. So if you are biased in your estimation of how much somebody can handle, what you do then about that is going to vary. So you may not be able to change your underlying bias because it's part of the way your brain works. We're very fast at doing these things. But you can change what you do about your decisions and check yourself, right, on whether bias is coming into play. All right, inequity. And you literally absolutely cannot read that, okay, so don't try. And even if you could, you wouldn't understand what it means because it's the worst possible slide. But it's an important graph from this study. So what I'm gonna ask you to do is focus just on the light pink bar for a second. So the light pink bar represents the quarter of the population who had the lowest income, okay? And relative to the quarter of the population that had the highest income. This is the odds ratio, the cost, the chance that they're gonna have a poor health outcome. So on the first set of bars, that's 1977 to 1979, individuals in the bottom cohort as compared to the top quarter of income were twice as likely to experience a negative health event, okay? In the middle bar, that's 87 to 89, they're now 2.5 times more likely. In 97 to 99, they're almost 3 times more likely, okay? So what that's telling you is that the cost of inequity on health is going up decade by decade. It actually continues to go up, but for some reason they haven't published the more recent numbers. The lines on the bottom, the squiggly lines on the bottom, the squiggly lines are people who are increasing their income from 1970 to the current time. And all the straight lines, that's 50% of the maximum income and below. So that's probably most of us, right? No change in our income from 1970 to now as compared to the cost of living, okay? So at the same time that the size of the inequity is massively increasing, the cost of the inequity on health is increasing, okay? But it is not only people at the low end of the income distribution who suffer when a society is unequal, as we've been discussing with respect to substance use disorders in particular. In fact, so the next slide is showing the cost of social and economic problems on the y-axis, on the up and down axis, and the degree of social inequity, economic inequity, on the x-axis, the bottom axis. And what you would see, if you could see the graph, is that we are all by ourselves in the top corner there it is, see? Doesn't it look just like I said? There we are, all by ourselves in the top corner with the highest income inequality and the highest social and economic index. What's cool about this paper that this graph came from is that it's a causal examination. So they looked at countries who changed their income inequality, for example, via a tax policy, to make it more or less unequal, and their social and health index tracked that change. So unfortunately, what that means for us is that we're probably gonna bump up and to the right a little bit of where we are right now, because we have changed our tax policy that in a way that increases inequity. So that is a manipulatable variable. We're probably never gonna be Japan down there on the bottom, right? But we don't have to be all the way up in the top left corner or right corner by ourselves. Okay, I'm so full of bad news today, it's terrible. Life expectancy, remember we were talking about before? Life expectancy in this country is currently going down, okay? That is the first time that life expectancy has gone down in this country since the First World War. This is a big problem. This should be getting much more attention than it is getting. The downtick is small in terms of total percentage, but what that literally means is that a baby born today is expected to live less long than a baby born 3 years ago, okay? That's the wrong direction, obviously. As you can see, it is also not true globally. So the green line is a whole bunch of countries aggregated together, and on average, that number is going up. Okay, so we've downticked to 78.6, and the aggregate has gone up to 80.3. The Center for Disease Control attributes the change, okay, so lots of things contribute to life expectancy, diet, all kinds of things, right? But they attribute the change, the downturn, to the increase in death by suicide and death because of substance use. So exactly the issues you guys were raising. Dramatic uptick across the country, and Colorado's in the top 10 states experiencing upticks in both of those concerns. Now, we are here because we're talking about early childhood. So why am I talking about these things? I'm talking about these things because if you go in and look at the ACE data, the strongest outcomes of adverse experiences in childhood are death by suicide and substance use. Those are the big hitters. Depression always gets the play because it's 5 times or something more likely. Suicide is like 17 times more likely. Okay, so the heavy hitters of experiencing early adversity are these. We're in this position because we're not taking care of kids. And it's very clear, I think, from the evidence, what the problem is. Getting everybody on the same page and focused on the same issues is what this is about. Those differences, those health differences, begin in infancy. So you can see differences in infants in the 0 to 3-year-old range as a function of family income and as a function of early adversity. As some of you mentioned, you're seeing drug-addicted babies. In fact, what predicts birth weight, right? Intrauterine condition, right? So there's sometimes kids are born early for a random host of other reasons, but low birth weight is the first indicator of a difficult environment, right? If an infant, a neonate, a fetus is in a difficult intrauterine environment, they come out early. And it is actually the infant that triggers birth. So we see those effects really, really early and continuing out across the lifespan. Okay, in terms of proximal consequences, like how would we measure this right now if we wanted to? You can actually measure, like I said, your functional age, right? So that's your, that little pink and green thing is what? What's that pink and green friend up there? Chromosome, okay. So the pink part is the coding DNA, the protein, the stuff that will make proteins, okay? The green part, the end caps are the telomeres, right? Telomeres. Potato. That green bit on the end gets chopped off every time a cell gets replicated. That's normal. As cells get replicated across your lifespan, right? That telomere gets shorter and shorter. When it's gone, the pink part, then the pink part kind of unravels. That cell is done, okay? That's the end of that cell's life. When that's happening all over your body, you're getting near the end of your life. But it's not as if you get that green part on the front end and that's all you ever get. You can regrow your telomeres. You can increase your telomerase activity to reverse, essentially, this process, like literally turn back the clock of time. You can see the effects of telomere shortening as the result of stress by 9 years of age. Okay, I don't need to wait for cardiovascular disease. I can take a spit sample from a 9-year-old. Okay, I can probably do better than that. I can probably get it down much younger than that, if that's what we ask for, if that's what we say we need to know. How early can we tell that this kid needs help, this family needs help, and it may not be just by looking at their external circumstances that we would find that to be true. So there are proximal consequences long before you see the emergence of disease. We also see differences in how the brain grows. We see differences in brain volume by 3 years of age as a function, in this case, of socioeconomic position. So that's a combination of the family's resources and the influence of inequity, right? So it isn't just that you don't have the same resources, that you don't have the resources you need, you also have fewer resources than other people. You're also experiencing discrimination based on your socioeconomic position. So it's a complex set of things. Gray matter is a very gross measure. Gross, not like disgusting, but like inaccurate. So it's a little bit wiggly, but who knows? Raise your hand if you've heard of Hart and Risley. Okay, you just don't know what I mean. Let's try it a different way, because it's not just one person. Who knows that the amount of words that a kid hears in the first 3 years of life matters for their vocabulary size? There you go. That's Hart and Risley. Does this graph look exactly like the Hart and Risley graph by age 3, right? Number of words spoken, the vocabulary size of the kid, total gray matter volume. These are all tracking the same information. Okay. And then this was a much bigger, much more widely publicized study where they looked at cortical surface area, which is how foldy the brain is essentially, if you stretched it out, all the foldy parts, stretched it out, right? How big is it? As a function of family income from ages 3 to ages 20. When I read, I forget what newspaper it was, but it was like the New York Times or something. I saw the flash about this study, and it said family income is linear, I think it said linearly, or like more family income, bigger brain. So I literally read the headline and thought, wow, are there people like walking around trying to carry their head? I mean, that's what it sounded like, right? So I pulled the article. I'm like, that's interesting. Yeah, it's not the case that if you have $300,000 of income, you have an enormous brain. It is, in fact, the case that if you have less than $50,000, it's hard to grow one, okay? Those are two completely different things. The action is on the front end, and this study, literally this graph, depending on where you go in the world, is used as a justification for universal basic income, okay? Got to build a brain, got to get to the starting point. So if you see that linear thing, it's not that. Heavy brain. All right, who's going next? Stand up and shout it out. Right on. Safe community. Stand up and shout it like you're proud. Mental health matters. Your strength or opportunity. Nice. Because we are proud of our strengths and our opportunities, right? Great. Come on. Growth. Willingness to change based on needs. Passion to help others. Resources for dental work, love it. Diversity. Stand up and shout it like you're proud. Mental health matters. Nice. People being involved in caring. Great. Lots of nonprofits. Woo woo! Did you hear that one, or did you just hear me shouting? The voters putting money back into the bond. Yeah. Resources for dental work, love it. Diversity. Nice. We live in a beautiful place. Yes. Right on. Everybody tell Governor Polis that school readiness takes mental health. Next time you see him. We educate them, the legislators. That's our job. I'm all for full day kindergarten. Yes. What else have we got? Strong early childhood programs. We just need more of them, it sounds like. Yes. Nicely said. Everybody tell Governor Polis that school readiness takes mental health. Right, showing up, turn up. We educate them, the legislators. That's our passionate people. I'm all for full day kindergarten. Yes. Bike-friendly community. I actually brought my mom up with me and dropped her off downtown, and then I told her to be careful of the bicyclists because. What levers are we going to push on? That's our next question. Uh-oh. So, it's a little jumpy. So this is just ecological systems theory, right? Braun from Brenner. Where is that child situated? What are the levers at the different levels of the systems that we can affect? And sometimes you have access to different layers in different parts of your life, right? So you have different layers that you can access in your community, in your family, in your professional lives, in your other organizations you're in. So often it's not a question of which one, right? But how many? How many levers can you touch? How many ways can you work on these issues? And trying to think about what those are broadly and creatively, like somebody mentioned. If we want to understand resilience, we need to start with a proper definition of it. So resilience is not a rose growing in a desert. That's the sort of American silly idea that resilience is born without input. What makes resilience happen are resources, and the most important resources we have are people. So whatever your favorite book or movie is about somebody who had horrible circumstances and had good outcomes, think about that book or movie and which person it was that invested in that kid, that community, right? And turned it around. People are what make the difference for other people. Because we're mammals, we're a social animal, and that's the most important thing for us. So if we want to understand resilience, what we're trying to understand is better than expected outcomes given an assessment of risk, and we need to understand what resources that's going to take, keeping in mind that most of the time, the resources that are needed are people. Some factors to consider. What is the context? What are you trying to change, and why are you trying to change it? So if you want to change somebody's behavior, how can you engage them as a rational actor? How can you engage a person to make a choice that makes sense for them? If you want somebody to go back to school, for example, get a credential, adapt to the changing workplace, which is probably a lot of what's happening with your economic pressure here, how do you make that possible for somebody when that's going to mean a drop in their income? When that's going to mean that they need support for childcare, right? When you're asking somebody to make a rational choice, think about how they could make a rational choice. What is the simplest solution? Sometimes we get really wrapped up in our fancy programs and our fancy approaches, and we love those. But is there a simpler solution that might work, like a bus, or something like that that is much more concrete? What solutions can you access or get buy-in for? The best solution may not have any traction in your community. People may not vote for it. They don't want it. So give it up and move on to a different one. Don't get stuck on your answer, right? Don't get stuck on your solution. Get stuck on the problem. If you have to come up with a different solution, then that's what you do. Believe in change. Believe that people can change, because they do. And that happens across the entire lifespan. And keep in mind that caregivers are incredibly powerful. And caregivers really are all of us, right? Is there anyone in this room who's not a caregiver for at least one other human? Right? Somewhere in your life? Okay, and probably many of you are caregivers for more than one type of human, age of human, that kind of thing. Okay, so we're just going to walk through each of these. What is the context? We have, and you have to fight it because we all have it, an implicit assumption of irrationality. We assume that people are in the situation they're in because they've made irrational choices, that we would have made different choices if we had been in the same situation, and that is often incorrect. So the best example of this for me is, who's heard of the marshmallow task? Okay, so you've seen the marshmallow task, right? So what happens is somebody who looks like me, a younger version of me, comes into a room where a little child is and says, okay, I'm gonna give you a marshmallow. Now, if you wait and don't eat it, I'll be back in a few minutes and you can have 2. And then goes out the door, okay? Never seen me before, okay? And then that is used as an indicator that that child has delay of gratification. If they don't eat that marshmallow, they wait till I come back and they get the 2 marshmallows. Now, they have more benefit because they waited. They do all kinds of funny things. They sing to themselves. It's hilarious. It's a fun little task to do. But because kids who have had more stress, lower resources, have trouble with that task, we say they have trouble with delay of gratification. We advocate for executive skills, executive function training in schools, okay? So that is based on the assumption that the child behaved irrationally. Okay, let's say adults are not super reliable, right? You don't know me. I just told you could have this marshmallow now, or I'll be back and give you a second one in a little while. What fool doesn't eat the marshmallow? Like, seriously, why is that irrational? If your experience has not been a bag of marshmallows on the counter at your house, adults who can always bring you the things they say they're gonna bring you, right? That's not irrational. We need a different strategy if we want to change it. And it's true for all kinds of things. A bias toward watching for threat versus missing it. Okay, you're going to over watch for it if missing it is a very high cost. Accelerate your maturation. If resources are scarce, you need to get down to business. You need to have babies earlier because who knows how long you're going to live. There is a huge biologic drive to do that. That's not irrational. It's not irrational to have untimed early birth, early pregnancy. It is a reaction to a situation. If you want somebody to delay sexual onset, you want them to delay childbearing, you have to give them some reason to believe that that delay is going to benefit their outcome. Storing fat, staying vigilant. There's all kinds of factors where we create interventions based on our idea that people are doing these things irrationally against their own best interest. It might be against their own best long-term interest, but if we want to change the behavior that the person has, right, we can't just turn up and tell teenagers, for example, that they shouldn't have sex. That's not going to work, okay? So another strategy, lots of other strategies have been tried. We actually have some good ones in Colorado. So to support a transition to different rational choices, you have to actually change the value proposition. You have to think carefully about what that is and why somebody might behave that way versus thinking, whether you acknowledge it or you don't, that you would act differently if you were in that situation, because that's often the bias that we're fighting. Okay, what is the simplest solution? Again, I love programs, but honestly, why don't we just give people the money? Because the program is super, super expensive, right? And when you have the money, so cash transfer programs are a real thing. They're a real thing in this country. They're a real thing across the world. Say the program costs $4,000. What if I give the family the $4,000 and they can use it for childcare, or they can use it for transportation, or they can use it for food, or they can use it for an enrichment program? We don't do this because we think what? What will happen if we give people cash? They'll do something irresponsible. Okay, so last time you got a tax return, raise your hand. Did you get a tax return last year? Okay, did you do something super responsible with it? So most people, given a one-time cash infusion, blow it. Most people, given a consistent increase in their income, like a raise, save it or invest it in something reasonable, okay? So cash transfer programs are a guarantee of a cash transfer every month across a period of time. That's more like a raise than it is like a tax return, okay? And as it turns out, most people use it responsibly, whether or not it is contingent. So a contingent cash transfer program is one that requires somebody to do certain things in order to get the cash, and a non-contingent one is one in which they just get the money, okay? So this is being tried all over. There's a very cool trial happening right now where they're looking at effects on brain growth if they just give families cash. You don't have to give families like literally a wad of cash, okay? The actually politically acceptable version of this is a tax credit, okay? So a tax credit can often have a very same income effect and has been used in this country many times. It's a good tool. It's a very useful tool. So one of the times I was somewhere, I'm not gonna say where, giving a talk, I was maybe this far into it, and somebody raised their hand and said, I think what I understand from what you're saying is we need to require parenting classes for everybody who gets public assistance. And I said, excellent idea. That'll be everyone, because y'all are getting a tax break, right? Isn't that everyone? Who's not getting public assistance? Did you drive here on a road? Right? That's all of us. Great, let's do it. Parenting classes, I'm all in. So, you know, I think we need to think about what it is we're doing. Now, you may have zero traction in your community for cash transfer. Fine, move on to the next solution. But if you have traction for cash transfer. It's the simplest answer to the problem. So what can you get access? What can you buy to? What can you get people to do? We're going to do this one a little faster because I want to keep moving. So 60 seconds. What are the levers you personally touch? Think for 60 seconds, please. So you should be quiet. So, yeah, good question. So what are the things that you can affect in your personal or professional landscape that are relevant to the issues we've been talking about today? So I don't see anyone under 18, so like you can all vote. So everybody has at least one. Okay, so share one of your levers with somebody different than you've been pairing with all this time. All right, believe in change. We struggle with this in our profession, in our country. We see a family that's struggling with multiple issues, and it's hard to see change. And one way that it's hard to see change, in particular, that I hear a lot when I go here and there, is that we have, so who's heard the phrase, we've lost the war on poverty? Yeah? So we've lost the war on poverty because, why have we lost it? That's a fair point. We've lost the war on poverty. The reason that people say that is because the poverty rate, the proportion of people who are experiencing poverty at any given time, has stayed stable for the past 50 years, okay? So people take that number and then assume that the same people have been poor. And that is actually a question that I was curious about the answer to, right? So what proportion of families are still poor? Because if it's all of them, if it's all 41%, right, of kids living in poverty right now who then are parents living in poverty, that is a failure, right? We've definitely lost the war, and the social programs we have are not working, which is a different question than if some people are moving out of poverty and others aren't. That tells us how to focus our resources. So I asked that question of some big national data sets. 4 big national data sets, we combine them together and we use a technique called latent profile analysis, which lets the data group itself, essentially. And what we found is that we looked at a whole bunch of data points when families had a 1-year-old. And the families grouped into 3 general types. So 44% of families in these national studies that were not about poverty were currently experiencing low-risk conditions. So mom had good education, not living in poverty, not using social services. About 47% of families were in high-risk but lower instability conditions. So they were experiencing poverty, maybe using social services, but not experiencing food and housing instability. And then 9% of families were in high-risk conditions and highly unstable. So they don't know where their next meal is going to come from, their housing's not secure, they don't have any assets. So that's how the data grouped, that's how the families grouped, okay? And then these were longitudinal data sets. So then we looked at the same data when the kids were 3, and we saw that by age 3, so that's just 2 years later, nearly all of the families who were in low-risk conditions at time 1 were still in low-risk conditions. That's good. But if you look at the kiddos who were in high-risk, low instability conditions, now 87% of those families are no longer living in poverty. Okay, that's a lot. And then among the high-risk group, 56% are no longer living in poverty. So what that tells me is that for a lot of families, the programs we have are working. In a 2-year window, that's pretty fast. And then for some of our families, for that 64%, right, those high instability families, they really need more services, more resources, more assistance. And so that tells me that focusing in, drilling in on families with these multiple instabilities is probably a big factor, okay? So we should keep the programs we have because they're helping a lot of families, and then we need to dial it up for some people. That's a pretty clear answer to a question that is different than we've totally lost the war on poverty, and if a family is poor today, they're going to be poor tomorrow. And the reason I know we think that is because what do we call families experiencing poverty? How do you refer to them? Low-income families, right? So my mom, who I've already referred to, but she's on my mind today, has diabetes. She absolutely hates being called a diabetic. She would like to be called a person with diabetes because it isn't her defining characteristic. So if you call a family a low-income family, does that sound changeable? They're a family experiencing low income. Those are two different ways of thinking about it. If you want to believe in change, talk about change, right? Talk about how we're going to help people change, because most people change. Most people change their circumstances. We've already talked about this compensation idea, regrowing our telomeres, increasing our lifespan, but we did not do the shout out. What does it? How do you turn back the clock of time? What works? I keep waiting. I'm going to have to do it. I keep waiting for somebody to do that study. I'll just have to do it because that's how everything is. I reached a point in my life where I was like, you know what? You just have to do it. And also I kept thinking there was some magic to how things got made. They must know something. That's how they made that cool program. No, they just made it up. So make one up. And if it works, it's great. If it doesn't, do something else. Okay, so social relationships, we need to test that. That will be a key one. But what has been studied? Meditation. Somebody got a Nobel Prize for that. Yep, exercise. Those are the two heavy hitters. Nutrition is also getting some evidence, okay? So you can literally turn back the clock of time by exercising, engaging in mindfulness, making good nutritional decisions, and probably having tight social connections. So the number one reason people don't exercise is they don't have enough time. So the next time you think that, because you're going to think it, just ask yourself how much time you want to have left. Okay, you're not going to forget that. All right, it's a tiny intervention everywhere you go. Okay, also, there is great, interesting evidence that epigenetics is literally it means layered on top of the genome. It is the set of signals that tell genes when and where to be expressed. And there is a lot of research now about how our experiences are one of the things that influence how our genes decide when and where to be expressed, okay? And that can be transmitted from one generation to the next. So experience literally can affect the way your genes are expressed, so that one person's experience and interface with the world is not the same as somebody else's. So, for example, one of the things we do is act as if, because at any given point in time it's true, the number of calories you eat and the amount of exercise you do balance out into an equation. So that must mean that if people have extra weight, that they're eating too much or not exercising enough. As if every single person is in the same equation, which is complete nonsense. That's completely wrong, okay? The way your body processes calories depends on a lot of factors, like the way your genes are expressed. It isn't the same for everyone. So you don't know anything about somebody who's carrying extra weight because you don't know anything about somebody who's carrying extra weight. You don't know anything about what they eat, how much they exercise, and what epigenetic profile they're carrying, okay? So a person is a multiple storied thing that has a lot of things that went into it, a lot of things you're never gonna know. And maybe you can see and guess a couple of things, and that's all you've got, right? If we don't share our stories, we don't have our stories. So keep in mind, this is one way to do it. I can make fancy scientific studies, but it's the exact same thing you know, which is that people only know about you what you share, right? What they know, and a lot of things go into a simple outcome, like how much do you weigh today, not just what is on the surface of that equation. Change occurs across the lifespan. We are very focused on the first and most important early life period, which is prenatal to age 3. I am also very focused on that age span. I think it's very important. However, it is not the only sensitive period. It is not the only time in the lifespan where we are especially open to input, okay? There are at least 3: early life, adolescence, and the transition to parenting. So you have probably heard, because it's in the common language, that adolescent brains are still developing, right? Everybody heard that? Till what age? 25 is generally, but you know, brains have changed, so 28 works for me. Okay, so 25, let's say it's 25. And when we're talking about a baby, we talk about it like this beautiful opportunity and this amazing thing. And then when we're talking about adolescents, we're like, oh my God, they're driving cars. Their brains are still developing. It turns out that the changes that happen in adolescence, the reason you have an open, sensitive period in adolescence is critically important for adult well-being. It is a very important time for things like decision-making, risk-taking, emotion regulation, things that we all know adults who struggle with, right? So it is also a positive sensitive period. Adolescents need opportunities to test their skills, just like you read to a baby and hold their little hands while they're learning how to walk. You have to give adolescents opportunities to test social relationships, to make decisions, to learn how to make decisions, how to take safe risks, because adolescents have to take risks, right? Moving away from home and going to college is a big risk. Falling in love is a big risk. They need to do these things, and they need practice at them, just like little babies need practice at walking and all the things that they're learning. So keep that in mind if you have one or the next time you see one. And then the transition, because we tend to avoid them, adolescents. All right, and then the third definitive sensitive period is the transition to parenting. There are probably more, and there are probably other ones that are individual. But the transition to parenting is a massive sensitive period. When you transition to parenting, whether you are male or female, whether you are biologically or not biologically related to the child, your brain undergoes a massive reorg, structurally and functionally. That means the way the tissue is organized and the way the tissue works. Those changes are exactly the same in humans, or the same regions in humans as they are in other species. This has been studied for a long time in mammals. I've been really neglecting this side of the room. They're exactly the same regions that we see in non-human animals, and those have been studied for many decades. The human work, the first study was published in 2011. So what we see in what's now called the parenting brain are changes to the way stress is handled, changes that help promote positive emotions and bonding, specific species-relevant behaviors, and increases in parental motivation. So that's like the drive to get up and pick that child up a bunch of times in the night. So these changes happen in key parts of the brain. The reward circuit, which is the part of your brain that helps you approach things that are important for you. I'm avoiding this side because the feedback's worse. What that looks like is when somebody hears their baby cry or sees a picture of their baby, the part of the brain that processes rewards is activated, and therefore they are motivated to go and care for that infant. They feel good when they're the person who makes that baby stop crying. And actually the cry is more powerful than the smile. So the cry is the most powerful signal for this system. Again, in both new mothers and new fathers, irrespective of biologic relatedness to the child. We see structural growth in this part of the brain. In fact, all of the transitions that happen when people become parents are growth. So the next time somebody says they have mommy brain, congratulate them, because that's a fantastic thing. They may not know where their keys are, but they know where their human is, so let's keep our priorities straight. And the amount of growth that you see in this part of the brain is associated with how much you say your baby is beautiful, perfect. More functional activity is happening to your own baby as compared to another baby. So you don't just like babies now, you like this baby. So it all kind of feeds together into the same thing. We see changes in the social information circuit, which is the part of your brain that helps you detect social signals, understand what facial behaviors mean, sounds, words, other social signals mean. which is something you're doing really actively when you're trying to take care of an infant, and that's why you become the people who know how to make that baby feel better, right? And other people don't have that vocabulary until the child is old enough to really advocate for their own needs, which, I don't know, I have a 6 and a 4-year-old, and they're definitely still working on that, right? To get a stranger to give them what they need is pretty tricky. And then we see lots of changes in the emotion regulation circuits. Parenting is nothing if not a giant emotion regulation exercise. So it's to care a lot about this person, right? But control the way you feel and the way you respond so that you can meet their needs. So who knows somebody that they would never call in an emergency? Because they do what? Freak out, make you feel bad, think of other reasons why it's bad, right? Okay, that's not good emotion regulation, right? Emotion regulation is keeping your own reaction in check so that you can meet the needs of this individual. And this is something that goes awry. It's something that new parents can struggle with, and that can look like a new parent saying, when she cries, I just cry, right? It can look like that. It can look like, if they really trust you, it can look like a parent saying, I thought I was gonna be overwhelmed with love for this baby, and I don't feel that way. It can look like walking away because the cry is so overwhelming and they can't be in the house because it makes them feel so unwell. That's what the lack of brain activation in this way can look like. Okay, it also matters that you have these brain changes. So the more that people have these neural activation differences, the more sensitive and responsive they are in play bouts with their infant. That's a very strong relationship if you can't see it from where you're sitting. And caregivers are these incredibly powerful buffers. So when they provide this sensitive and non-intrusive responsive care to their infants and young children, they literally protect their bodies from stress, okay? So they are these incredible resources. They can literally stop the speeding bullet that is aimed at that child because we live in a vastly unequal and unfair world. And that's what we're asking them to do, right? We are asking them to put their body in front of that bullet and make it better. That isn't fair. That isn't what we should be asking for, but that is what we're asking for. And they can do it, okay? They can do it. What are we gonna do to make that possible for them? What are we gonna do to stop the bullet upstream so that parents don't have to act that way? I know that parents are these incredible buffers because I spend a lot of time with parents who experience significant adversity and because we have measured it. So in this data, what we have here is we took a sample of families who are experiencing significant adversity and currently experiencing low income. We asked them to play with their child, their infant. We coded that behavior on terms of sensitivity, responsiveness, intrusiveness, positivity. We separated out the babies who had the parents who were high in those positive parenting characteristics versus those who were low. Then we stressed the baby, okay? So we had a loud noise, a scary mask, it's awful. So this 7 minutes, it's terrible. I'm really glad this study is done. So stress the baby for 7 minutes, and what you see there is the blue line are the babies who had those parents who were sensitive, non-intrusive, positive, responsive. They did not care about our scary gorilla or our loud noise. They had mom or dad, okay? They did not respond. Their body did not respond to the stressor. They might have cried, but they didn't show a physiologic response to the stressor. Whereas the orange line, kiddos, responded to every little bump, even though they had their mom or dad with them. So literally, the stressors that are being applied to the child, how they react to them depends on the caregiver that's with them. How do we make it possible for somebody to do this incredible job? That's gonna take a lot of those layers that we talked about before. Okay, postpartum vulnerabilities make this harder. Postpartum vulnerabilities are super common in men and women. We now do a good job of screening women. We don't do a good job of doing anything with the screening information, and we never screen men. So this is something low-hanging fruit we can do something about. Depression and anxiety turn out to be relatively easy to treat on average. And we do see that that matters when parents have substance use histories, current depression, no good caregiving experiences of their own. They do not see the same brain boost, the same changes in those brain regions as parents who have not had those adversities. So not only are they trying to parent in difficult circumstances, they're doing it without the same underlying neurologic advantage. So the question I've been wanting to answer for some time, and fortunately somebody did for me, is can we change that? And yes, we can. So effective intervention in the immediate postpartum period results in the parents showing the brain changes that they didn't get naturally. So if we get in there and provide an intervention right away in those first few weeks, in this sample the parents had current depression, their brain will follow. This particular intervention was called Mom Power. It's an attachment-based intervention. I don't think that Mom Power is magic. I think an intervention that's working will change your brain because it turns out your brain tracks your experience. But it's really great, powerful evidence that this is not deterministic. So the trajectory is real, the trajectory is happening, but it is changeable. So the takeaways, inequities are severe and they matter a lot on average. People change, brains change, and inequity is not inevitability. Adaptations are rational. People make rational choices. If you want to change the behavior, change the value proposition. Resilience can be understood. It can be understood biologically, behaviorally, experimentally, experientially, both. If we understood it better, we could promote it better. And the only way we're going to understand it better is if we compare people who have experienced adversity who do and do not have good outcomes. Not if we compare people who have and have not experienced adversity. That does not get you to resilience, right? And supporting children and the adults in their lives together can be transformative and multiplicative. It is an excellent approach. I'm an ascender to the core. 2-generation is definitely the way to move forward, and really more than 2-generation, whole family system. All right, so last think, pair, share. You have no minutes. Huh? 30 seconds. Okay, this is what you're gonna walk away with. Why are you motivated to make this happen? What are your real reasons for being here today? What are you gonna do about it? Nobody is powerless. Okay, so one thing you're gonna do personally, when, how, and where. One thing you're gonna do professionally. Do that before you walk out of this room. And I'm gonna get off the stage now.